Township Democrats. And I am unable to make it. And as many of you would no doubt agree, this is a turbulent time in our nation's history. And our democracy, as I mentioned, depends on the awareness and participation of all of us, including all of us in this room tonight. And that's why it's so encouraging to see so many of you in this auditorium interested in what these candidates have to say. In addition, we know that running for office is a huge commitment and a personal sacrifice. So it is great to see these 5 individuals who want to serve their country and represent their district, these 5 individuals that we will get. National election for the 6th district. Everyone, if you could do me a favor, please save your applause until all candidates have been introduced. We have Kelly Mazeski from Barrington Hills, Sean Casten from Downers Grove, we have Jennifer Zordani from Clarendon Hills, Ryan Huffman from Palatine, and Carol Cheney from Naperville. And now let's talk a little bit about the format of tonight's forum. All questions were chosen in advance by the forum organizers, and all relate to some aspect of domestic policy. To begin, all candidates will have 2 minutes each to introduce themselves. After the opening statements, there will be 4 rounds of questions. 4 rounds. In the first round, there will be 5 questions asked. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer the question. In the second round, there will also be 5 questions, but each question will be addressed to only 3 designated candidates. After that, there will be 2 more rounds, 2 shorter rounds, one called a lightning round with yes or no answers, as well as then a final round requiring brief answers. After the final round, each candidate will then have 90 seconds for a closing statement. And now, before we start, there are a few things I'd like to ask of the audience. First, please turn off your cell phone ringers if they're not already turned off. Please, everyone, make sure that your telephone ringers or cell phone ringers are turned off. Second, please do not cheer or heckle the candidates. This takes up precious time. Well, it happens, and it's just a matter of people feel very passionately about these things, but we want to reserve as much time as possible for the candidates. So, please, do not cheer or applaud, because we'd like to give some time as much time as possible to these candidates. Ushers have been instructed to ask anyone waving a sign or banner to leave the auditorium. Please do not wave a sign or banner. And finally, as I mentioned, please save your applause to the end of the forum. Okay, so our timer tonight is going to be Janice Bennett. Janice, if you could please raise your hand. Thank you. Janice will be the timekeeper, and for the candidates, the yellow card will mean, when Janice holds up the yellow card, will mean there's 30 seconds left. And then when Janice holds up a red card and rings a bell, that will mean your time is up. And we respectfully do ask all the candidates, and I know you would anyway, but we respectfully ask all the candidates to adhere to the timing rules, please. Now, we will go ahead and start with the 2-minute opening statements from each candidate. And for this opening statements, we'll begin with Kelly Mazeski.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Kelly Mazeski, and I'm running for Congress because I believe we deserve a representative who will actually stand up and work for us. And I feel like Peter Roscom has thrown us under the bus. Is this sounding right? It sounds like it's echoing. Okay. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and 3 years ago, when I was going through chemo, our insurance company of 20 years informed me that they weren't going to provide insurance for my family the following year. And this was devastating. But I got on the phone, did some research, and I'm happy to say that the Affordable Care Act came through for me and my family, and I was able to find quality care and keep my doctors. But Peter Roskam and Donald Trump want us to believe that repealing the Affordable Care Act and gutting Medicaid is in our best interest, and we all know that's not true. I'm a scientist, and because I'm a scientist, I understand the harsh realities of climate change is the biggest threat facing our generation. I've been a longtime Sierra Club member and a longtime grassroots activist for our planet. And because of that, I was elected in 2014 to the Illinois Environmental Council because of my work. And Donald Trump and Peter Roskam want to put politics over facts when it comes to climate change. They want to jeopardize the health of our planet, the health of our children, to simply prop up failing fossil fuel industries to make their supporters happy. And that's got to stop. So I'm running for Congress to make sure that we have a representative who will stand up to Trump on health care, on climate change, and for our hardworking families in the 6th. And I'm fortunate that I've been endorsed by Emily's List, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and Sherry Bustos. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Casten?
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Sean Casten. I am a biochemist and an entrepreneur by background. I spent the last 16 years running a couple different companies that all went into industrial facilities, identified energy that was being wasted, recovered it to turn it into heat and power. We did that because climate change is the existential threat that we face, and I felt that if we could build a company that allowed us to make no moral distinction between our obligation to the planet and an economic obligation to our wallet, that we could have some success. We did. We built about 70 projects. Every one of them lowered CO2, every one of them lowered energy costs, created jobs. And I now find myself with a president and a representative who not only refuse to find that win-win, but deny the very facts of climate change. And they have a general approach that says that when they confront a fact they don't like, they will deny it. None of us in this room have that luxury. And this denial of facts has become kind of endemic in the Republican Party. They deny the facts on health care. They deny the facts on taxes. They deny that their decisions on those have created massive deficits, which they're now going to use to justify gutting Social Security and Medicare. These decisions, when you make policies without facts, you kill people. I do not mean that to be hyperbolic. I believe that facts matter. I believe that representing people matters. I believe that when Peter Roskam doesn't like facts and doesn't respect people and doesn't have the courage to confront you and tell that to your face, he needs to be called out on it. Getting Peter Roskam unelected is critical, and it will not happen unless we have somebody who scares his pants off, who can confront him on the facts of healthcare, on climate, on the economy, and can appeal not just to Democrats, but to independents and Republicans, who at least in this district have been historically to support a generic Democrat on economic issues. I'm really looking forward to getting him on the unemployment lines in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zerdani.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Zordani. Thank you for being here. You're here because you know who Peter Roskam is. You know he doesn't represent you. He's not your voice in Washington. I've been running for almost a year now, meeting the voters in our district. And when I first started knocking on doors in the summer, I met a couple. When I knocked their door, I looked through the screen, they were watching TV side by side. They're in their 70s. And I remember it because they were watching Wheel of Fortune. And I'm an 80-year-old at heart, and I love Wheel of Fortune. But when he came to his door, and I said I'm a Democrat running, the first thing he said to me was, "Will you protect my Social Security?" And as I run this race, I think about what Peter Roskam doesn't think about. He doesn't think about the people in this district. Yesterday, I met a young man going to college, working 3 jobs. He's paying Social Security, for every single dollar he earns. And he's going to college, and he's trying to do it in a way that he doesn't build this huge debt. Peter Roskam doesn't focus on a man like him. He doesn't focus on our young people, what matters to the people in our district. Peter Roskam's a sheep who follows Paul Ryan, who follows Donald Trump. You know that. I'm no sheep. I've been an attorney for 24 years. I've been a regulatory attorney. I grew up in DuPage County. I live in Clarendon Hills. I would love to represent you, to work for the values that we share, and to help you build. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Huffman?
Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Huffman. I'm 31 years old. I live in Palatine. I'm a data analyst. I actually grew up here in Elgin on the east side. Went to public schools, UB46, graduated Elgin High School in 2004. I've lived in this area almost my entire life, save for a couple of years in DC. So in addition to understanding sort of the problems that we face around here, I also have the political experience and the policy expertise to actually go about solving these problems. So I have a master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. I've interned at the White House under President Obama. I've also spent time on Capitol Hill whipping votes. So I can help solve these problems and also make sure that they're actually turned into legislation, because it's really difficult to navigate the system in DC right now. I'm in this race because the country is on a really bad path right now. And it's not just Donald Trump. The entire government is failing the American people. If the government was working properly, we would not see debates about whether we believe in climate change. The debates would be about what's the most efficient way to reduce carbon emissions. We wouldn't be debating which Americans deserve to have health care. We'd be debating what's the best way to lower overall costs in a system where every single American is covered. And I've spent time on Capitol Hill, I've spent time in campaigns, and I see the root cause of all of this, the reason that government is no longer working for the people, and it's simply money in politics. That is the cause of all of it. And until we fix that, we're not going to be able to fix any of these other problems. So, and unfortunately, it's a problem not just for Republicans, it's a problem for Democrats as well. We're a little too eager to play into that system and say, well, that's just the way it goes. But we are all running for the chance to compete against the biggest coward in Washington, D.C., Peter Roskam. And if we're going to beat him, we're not going to do it by playing on his turf. We're not going to do it by outspending him. We've got to do it by outworking him, by outmessaging him, and by showing real political courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cheney.
You know, I feel that Peter Roskam and Donald Trump are a threat to the American dream. They're a threat to the thought that everyone, not just the wealthy, should have the opportunity to succeed. They're a threat to the moral fabric of our society, to our economy, to our climate, to our health care. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago. My dad was a union butcher, and we didn't have much. But we knew that if we worked hard, we would have the opportunity to succeed. When I was in high school, my dad lost his job. We had to sell our home and move into an apartment. But I got my first job at age 16. I've been working ever since, and I still knew that if I worked hard, I would be able to go to college, and I'd be able to succeed. And I did go to college. I went to the University of Illinois through affordable student loans and paying my way through in the dormitory food service with the beautiful hat that I got to wear. And then I got a master's degree at the University of Illinois in Springfield. And then I worked my way through Northwestern Law, where I was honored to be the editor-in-chief of the Law Review. I was a full-time attorney, a full-time mom, and a community volunteer. And then life happened again. A few years ago, I had major surgery. I was unable to work for a year and a half. And I discovered during that time that there are many people like me who struggle, who have done everything right, but they need a helping hand. And so I left the corporate world, and I worked for Congressman Bill Foster as his Illinois Chief of Staff. And in that position, I did exactly what Peter Roskam did not do and is not doing. I listened to constituents, I met with them, and their voices were heard. I want your voices to be heard.
Thank you, candidates. Let's get right to the first round of questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer, and the starting candidate will shift with each question. Here is the first question, and the starting candidate for the first question will be Kelly Mazeski. And the first question is the following. Immigration policy was a major issue in the last presidential election and remains so today. What does good immigration reform mean? Also, what do you propose for an immigration policy and/or for a border security policy? Beginning with Ms. Mazeski.
Thank you. Well, I think when people come to our country as undocumented immigrants, they're coming here looking to live the American dream, just like most of us in this room aspire to live. And I think what we need more than anything is a comprehensive immigration reform, bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform that would allow our undocumented immigrants to come out of the shadows and fully participate in our society and make a living and pay taxes. I absolutely support extending DACA and passing the DREAM Act. 80% of Americans support passing the DREAM Act. We need to let these people, children who came over with their parents and had no say in the decision, to have the opportunity to become American citizens. I think this is a moral issue and we owe it to them. When it comes to border security, I absolutely think we should have strong walls, but I think we can do it in a more cost-effective manner and a high-tech efficiency. I also want to mention that we have net zero immigration from Mexico, and that the majority of our immigrants are coming from Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, and they're coming because of extreme poverty and danger. And President Obama committed $1 billion to go to these countries and resolve it at the root problem. So they don't want to come here and immigrate, and they can stay in their homeland, and that's what we should also be doing.
So in 2009, I was selected by the Chicago Council of Global Affairs in their second class of emerging leaders, which was an awesome program. I encourage you all to become members. And they gave us a 2-year project to figure out how comprehensive immigration reform would affect the city of Chicago, because at the time that was presumed to be something that was soon going to happen. That's really depressing. One of our conclusions was that if you could do nothing else politically, do DACA and the Dreamers, because there's no real political objection to that and it's easy. And we finished that saying, well, it's kind of a bummer because we got the easy thing and we didn't get any of the other hard stuff done. And now Trump has basically kidnapped the baby on that piece, which is offensive. The larger issue that came out on sort of what it would mean to do comprehensive immigration reform properly. Number one, the border wall is silly and stupid. The overwhelming majority of undocumented immigrants in the United States are visa overstays. Do we need to control if people come in? Absolutely, but there's some tricky civil liberties issues on visa overstays. It's not a wall. Number two, we have huge confusion of how we coordinate our drug policy, our terror policy that gets bound up in immigration and forces the wrong questions in the wrong places. The last piece is our immigration policy since our inception has been fundamentally racist based on national origin. We need to shift to a system that doesn't discriminate about the country people came from, but what skills and resources they can bring to the country.
Ms. Ordani?
So let's start with the recognition that Peter Roskam knows that Dreamers can't vote and undocumented immigrants can't vote. So those people are relying on us. I think good immigration policy is recognizing that diversity is a benefit to America. It's a recognition of where we all came from, and it was not here, unless you're Native American. Good immigration policy starts with fixing the immigration system. So an agent that wants to bring in to the system an immigrant has to review 26 different databases. The immigration system is difficult, and when people come here and they want to go through the process, It's hard on the agents, it's hard on the people. So good immigration policy starts with actually fixing our government. I am an advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. When I began this race, I put that on my placard so that people could see that I'm willing to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, notwithstanding that there is a smaller population in our part of the district who are dreamers and undocumented than maybe in other parts of Illinois. I think that the comprehensive immigration, I'll stop now, that 90 seconds is quicker than I thought. Thank you.
So let's start with immigrants are human beings, and any policy should stem from that they deserve to be treated as human beings, and that is not what's happening, especially with the Dreamers right now. They're being treated as bargaining chips, and Donald Trump doesn't care if he sends them back or not. We need to be, especially in this party as Democrats, we have to stick up for them. As far as immigration overall, I'm proud that we live in a country that so many people want to come to from all over the world. I think that's becoming less and less true as time goes on and the decisions that are being made by our leaders now. But I'm proud of that. And we should recognize too that the majority of immigrants who come over become productive members of society within 10 years. And you hear Paul Ryan talk about how, well, we're going to have to cut entitlements because we're not having enough children to support the future generations. Well, having more immigration is a good way to deal with that too. So there's reasons why we should create a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants and make it not a difficult process for people who want to come and support and pay taxes in America. The border wall is a terrible idea. And I think just what a message that sends to the people of Mexico to say, we so badly don't want you in this country that we're willing to waste tens of billions of dollars on this stupid wall to try and keep you out. Can you imagine if Canada did that to us? I mean, they may before long, where we're going. That's not what America's about.
Ms. Cheney.
What I find particular is that we had the opportunity to achieve comprehensive immigration reform a few years back. In fact, the Senate voted for it, it was in the House, and it was blocked by House Speaker Boehner. And Peter Roskam, there were actually news conferences in this district encouraging Peter Roskam to stand up in favor, in support of comprehensive immigration reform, and he chose to do nothing. I heard him on an interview on WBEZ in November when he was talking about it. He said comprehensive immigration reform is just not achievable. It needs to be done piecemeal. It was achievable, and he blocked it. We need to stand up for the DACA recipients. They made a bargain with this country. They let the country know their personal information, and they have been doing everything that they were supposed to do in accordance with the DACA strictures. And on March 5th, they don't know what their futures will be. I understand the need for certain securities, but building a wall when our nation's infrastructure is crumbling, and we can set aside the infrastructure proposal that just came out today, is not the way to achieve the security we're looking at, nor are religious-based immigration bans. We can do things with drones, we can increase security, but not through a wall.
Thank you, candidates. The starting candidate for the next question will be Sean Casten. And here is the next question. How do you assess the state of our national infrastructure and are improvements needed? Do you support solely public financing of infrastructure projects, or do you believe there's a role for private investment? Beginning with Mr. Casten.
So I don't think there's any question but that we need to improve our infrastructure. My own background in the power industry, the average power plant in the United States is coming up on close to 50 years old. You could say the same of roads and bridges. I think we missed a huge opportunity in the tax bill. There are tools we have in the tax code to encourage people to invest. And our company invested when there were tax incentives to invest. And if you want to give corporations an incentive to invest capital, use those tools. Give people tax breaks for depreciation. If you want to create jobs, give people tax breaks for creating jobs. There are things that we absolutely need the government to do, but so much of the infrastructure we have in this country today, the steel mills, the cement plants, the trains, these were built by the private sector with effectively the government providing some form of long-term guarantee that you could get your money back. Had I not been doing this, one of the things I learned in investing about $200 million of capital over the course of the last 16 years is that if you're persuasive and good at your business, you can get a lot of private sector capital people out of their comfort zone to invest in infrastructure. It's really hard to have a comfortable investor. And there's this huge, as a friend said to me, he said there's an ocean of money that wants to invest in the glacier of infrastructure opportunities that are out there, and we're just looking for a river.
Ms. Zordani?
We know that across the country, infrastructure is crumbling. It's costly to our productivity, so we absolutely need some good infrastructure spending. It's also a safety issue. So it's not so long ago that we had the bridge collapse in Minnesota, and we know that so many of our bridges remain very, very dangerous. I think there is some room for public-private partnerships in infrastructure building. I'm more cautious about that maybe than Sean or some of the other candidates, because growing up in the Chicago area, and more recently I've seen some of the negatives that can happen to the public. So when we sell our parking meters and that go to our roads and the parking, and people have to start spending a lot more to park. When we sell our bridges and we pay much, much higher tolls, those things don't benefit the public. So there has to be a very cautious approach where we have accountability in how we dole out those public-private partnerships, where we're spending, where we're requiring that we use prevailing wage standards so that we're creating really good paying jobs. There's a lot that needs to go into an infrastructure bill. Thank you.
Mr. Huffman?
Well, I would spend a ton more in infrastructure spending. I mean, I think it's inexcusable in this country that we have so many people still unwillingly out of work when there is so much work to do. And I know our unemployment rate is lower than it's been in a long time, but I think we all know that's not really representative of the real strength of our economy, because so many people are still underemployed, wages are lower than they should be. So it's a huge economic opportunity. And the infrastructure spending of the 1930s is what built the middle class in this country. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal plan, and I think that is something that we can go back to revitalize the middle class here as well. In terms of public versus private, I agree that when you add the profit motive to something, it never ends up being good for the public. It's things like roads and bridges. It's too important to make sure that they're safe and really serving the best interest of the public. And infrastructure is not just roads and bridges. It's smart grid technology. It's broadband access to rural areas. These are things that are going to be hugely beneficial for people down the road. And so I think the government should take a proactive role in making sure that that's being done safely and properly. And as a result, we'll see another really great economic boom, and especially in the middle class.
Ms. Cheney?
Our infrastructure can be used also to improve our economy, particularly sustainable infrastructure. When we're talking about a green environment, why not have infrastructure that both is economically viable and environmentally helpful to the future? I have to tell you, what I find particularly troubling is the current infrastructure bill that Donald Trump has proposed really seems to trickle down the costs to local municipalities and to states. And one of the concerns is if you look at the tax plan, one of the things that people aren't really talking about that the tax bill that was passed and signed did is get rid of advanced refunding, which allows municipalities to take advantage of a one-time, if there's a lower interest rate on a bond, to refinance it once. And the tax bill takes away that opportunity. So as it is, it's going to be more costly for municipalities to engage in the very infrastructure improvements that we need. As a country, building the foundation of our country and the safety of bridges. And in Illinois, the safety of bridges is one of the major concerns. We do need to look at improving it. And I think public-private partnerships, particularly when I was working with Congressman Foster, they were looking at partnerships in the waterway areas. I think there is a role for that in our infrastructure system.
Ms. Mazeski?
I absolutely believe that we need to modernize our infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers has rated our infrastructure a D+. So if we want to attract corporations and businesses from overseas and keep growth coming here in our country, we need to have modern infrastructure to be able to efficiently and effectively transport goods and workers. It's also a win-win situation for our country because building the infrastructure would provide thousands of solid middle-class jobs with good wages. So it's a way to build our economy from the bottom up and not just at the top level. I think that this is a wise thing to do when you talk about public versus private funding. I am also concerned about Trump's plan because I'm afraid if we rely too much on the states to provide funding for this, that it will result in tax increases for the people in those states. So right now, I support primarily federal funding for doing this.
Thank you, candidates. The starting candidate for the next question will be Jennifer Zordani. And here is the next question. What should the federal government do to protect voting rights for all eligible citizens? Ms. Zordani.
We need to restore the Voting Rights Act and start more closely monitoring the elections across the country to prevent voter suppression. We need to look more closely at the election systems that we're using. For this election, this upcoming election in Illinois, I don't know if you've heard, but I'd really prefer that everybody pull a paper ballot. We know that there's some custody issues and concerns with the electronic voting. And here in Illinois, we have actually a good system. We try to open up our voting. It's better than a lot of places across the country. So I do think that the federal government has a role and the Justice Department has a role in enforcing the availability of voting access to all voters across the country. We saw in the last election that people were disenfranchised from the vote.
Mr. Huffman.
Well, there's a ton of issues that go into free and fair elections, and we're seeing a lot of different areas, different lines of attack against people who just want to vote in this country. And that's one of our most sacred American rights, is the ability to vote freely without restrictions. And it's clearly under attack. I would start, the number one thing I would do is say, let's make Election Day a national holiday. There's no reason not to do that. It's a no-brainer. That'll make it so much easier for more people to come out to vote. That is by not having it be a national holiday, it's sort of an implicit voter suppression tactic. So we need to eliminate that right away. Gerrymandering is another big cause that makes some people's votes worth more than others. That's another big way that we can change that at the federal level to say, you know what, we have to have all our district lines drawn by nonpartisan committees or the courts, and make sure that everyone's vote counts equally. So beyond that, I think there's efforts we're seeing, certainly this voter fraud commission, which was shut down, thankfully, Chris Kobach won, but has just been moved over to the Department of Homeland Security to do the same job. We've got to make sure that we're shutting that down as well. I love that we've got automatic voter registration in the state of Illinois. Let's try and expand that nationally. And then let's work on the disenfranchised felons across the nation, and let's make sure that they have the right to vote as well going forward.
Ms. Cheney.
I believe that the Department of Justice should be engaged in this issue because the right to vote is the most fundamental right that we have in this nation. And it is so unfortunate that excuses are being used. For example, IDs that are not required in other contexts being required of voters. But I agree that this is a broader issue. It's not only the issue of voting. It is the general issue of voter disenfranchising in all facets. Campaign finance reform is a huge example. We've all heard of the issues with the super PACs and the dark money. When people feel that elections are so-called bought, when they feel that politicians are voting for corporate interests instead of the interest of the individual that they were elected to represent, they don't feel that their vote matters anymore. And when there is gerrymandering, when someone doesn't need to listen to their entire community because they're safe in their district regardless, people feel that their vote doesn't matter. So there are numerous aspects to systemic reform that need to be undertaken in this country, and governmental reform on all levels, but including in the voter access, is extremely important if we're going to keep our electorate engaged.
One of our fundamental rights is to cast a vote for whoever we want as our elected officials. And we need to preserve that. And suppression for our voters is going on very intensely in certain states, and it's affecting the ability to vote for minorities, for the elderly, and for students. And this has got to end. I also believe that we need to have a national voting day so that people don't have to worry about missing work. We can make it easy for them, have them show up and cast their vote without worrying about being late or rushing through traffic. I think Illinois is great in that we have automatic voter registration at the DMV, and I think we need to make that easier. Again, we have states that are even reducing the number of their Department of Motor Vehicles to make it harder for people to get some kind of photo ID to vote with. So this needs to end. We also need to stop gerrymandering. We're playing games with politics and maps here. We need to allow, well, what should I say right now? Right now with gerrymandering, politicians are choosing their voters. And what we need to have instead is to allow voters to elect their representatives. So, again, it's a fundamental right, and we have to preserve this and make it easy for people to vote, not harder.
Mr. Casten.
Let me start with an easy definition of success with the request that all of you hold us accountable. One of us will win this election, and this is the metric. Congress has a 10% favorability ratio and an 85% incumbency ratio. When those two numbers are the same, we will have achieved a completely fair and representative voting system. Yes, gerrymandering is a problem. Money in politics, overwhelming problem. It has unfortunately become a partisan issue because people have known for at least 15 years that all of the demographic trends in this society are favoring the Democratic Party. The Republican Party could have decided to modulate their message to match demographics, and they instead decided to invest in voter suppression. That is a massive problem. There should be no difference in anybody's ability to get to a polling place. And, you know, I think we probably agree a lot on this, but let me tell you what I think is the biggest issue that Congress is going to have to deal with in 2019. How do we restore voters' faith that their vote is just as valid in the 2020 election as they thought it was in the 2016 election? This is a massive foreign policy issue. There is information about how the Russians impacted our election that people have said the only way they could have gotten that information is if they had inside access to vote builder files from congressional campaigns. We need to find out what happened, we need to get to the bottom of it, and we need to give people confidence that it won't happen again.
The starting candidate for the next question is Ryan Huffman. Here is the next question. Should the United States move to a single-payer healthcare system? If so, what steps should be taken to make this happen? If not, what is your vision for the future of healthcare? Mr. Huffman.
Thanks. Yeah, that's an easy one for me. Yes, we need to move to a single-payer healthcare system. This should be a no-brainer for us. We're seeing almost every other industrialized nation around the world is doing this. They're doing it well. They have better health outcomes. They have lower costs. There's no reason for us not to do this. And this is actually one of the few real differentiators we have in this race, because we tend to agree on a lot of issues up here, but we're not all in favor of single payer. To me, I respect Obamacare. I was benefited from the expanded Medicaid and Obamacare for a couple of years when I couldn't find a job. So I think we absolutely need to protect it, but people are not going to vote for us if we say we want to make sure a few more people have coverage. I mean, we need to say, as long as any American doesn't have coverage, our work's not done. We got to keep fighting until every single American has coverage, and single payer is the best way to do that.
Ms. Cheney.
I personally am in the marketplace system, and so I understand the need for basic, affordable, universal health care in this country. In theory, the idea of single payer, I agree with. It's how we get there. Even the labels, some people call it Medicare for all, others call it single payer, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing. And when we look at other countries, it actually is a combination in most countries of public and private. So it's getting to the details of how we would transition to that system. And like with any significant change in society, we would need to do it in a reasoned fashion where we have it set out and how we would achieve it. One intermediate step, and I believe this currently is a plan that's proposed, is a public option to increase the risk pool, because one of the big concerns right now is the narrowing of the risk pool. And what's so unfortunate is that people like Peter Roskam and Donald Trump are working very hard to sabotage the accessibility and affordability of health care instead of working to compromise and to achieve a health care system that can serve us all and do so affordably and with the access that we need.
Thank you, but in the long run, you would or would not be, I think it would be a good idea to move.
I think in the long run, yes, and it's how we would get there and making sure that we have set the stage for it, because, you know, you always hear the devil is in the details, and it's finding those details, because aspirationally, yes, I think that our country in the long run may end up with a system like that, but getting to that and paving the way for that takes time. And also how we label things is very important. Some people will use a label, Medicare for all, but what does that really mean? What does single payer really mean? In the definition of one person might be different.
Thank you, Ms. Cheney. Ms. Mazeski.
I support a Medicare for all public option. And what this means is that people would be able to buy into a Medicare program at any age, and this Medicare for all public option would compete side by side on the healthcare exchange with the policies offered by insurance companies. The Congressional Budget Office has stated that by having a public option, we would save taxpayers $158 billion over 10 years. Now that is truly significant. Also, the cost of care in this country per person per year is double that of the next 3 highest ranked nations. So again, we use the strong bargaining power of Medicaid to not only reduce insurance premium costs, but to reduce the cost of care itself. Then we also have to have the ability to negotiate prescription drug prices. I'm sure all of us have had sticker shock when we go to the pharmacy to pick up our medications. So we have to have that for our citizens and use that just as we do with the Veterans Administration right now. Healthcare is a personal issue for me. I know it's personal for all of you in this room. And when I went through breast cancer and we had another medical crisis in my family, I went back and figured out how much our bills were, and they were nearly $750,000. That is unacceptable. We have to make sure everybody has affordable quality health care so they don't go broke from their medical bills.
So the functional goal, regardless of how you get there, is the best possible health care at the lowest possible price. The US spends more per capita than any other country in the OECD, and we have worse health outcomes than any other country in the OECD. So the first steps are really easy. All we do is go to what those other countries have. Every single country that has better health outcomes than the US has a universal healthcare model. And whether you're single payer or multi-payer, it's universal healthcare. And let's be honest, we have universal healthcare in this country right now. It's just that for a lot of people, universal healthcare consists of doing nothing until something really bad happens and going to the emergency room. So what universal healthcare has to be is something that gives everybody an incentive and an opportunity both to deal with catastrophes and to get the preventative healthcare, because that's why it gets driven down. To take the next leap that universal healthcare is a no-brainer, do you go to single payer? There are no countries that have the size and heterogeneity of the United States that have single payer and have better health outcomes than the best countries that have multi-payer. And it kind of makes sense intuitively. If you've got a competitive market, truly competitive and disciplined and regulated, trying to figure out how to provide the right option for a lot of different people, that tends to be more efficient than a single payer figuring out how to get it done. And the ideal model would be one where everybody's got a floor. We have something like the Obamacare exchanges, but they're available for everybody, not just by state, by employer, and put that across the board.
Ms. Rodani.
I am first and foremost advocating for fixing the Affordable Care Act. And I'm advocating for that most strongly because we now know that people on both sides of the aisle recognize what it is, what it can do, and they're supportive of it. So to move to any new healthcare system, we hear from the answers here how varied the approaches are, how complex they are. I'm not clear what Sean's approach is exactly, and I didn't realize America had what a lot of us would think of as a universal healthcare system. I do think the Democrats are wrong when we say that the Affordable Care Act is almost there. We've almost achieved our goal because we do have 90% coverage. I agree with Ryan, that's not acceptable to have only partial coverage. But we also know that the coverage is not affordable for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who have gotten squeezed in this program. But let's face it, the Affordable Care Act doesn't work because the Republican politicians torpedoed it. Marco Rubio was very proud he failed to pay the insurers when they negotiated to cover the risk from the Affordable Care Act. That's been overturned by courts, so we'll start to see some money come in, but the system still needs to be stabilized.
Mr. Casten, you want to clarify what you meant by I think you said, and Ms. Rodani asked about the system right now being effectively kind of almost a de facto universal system. I don't know if I'm...
Yeah, and if I was unclear, I apologize. I don't mean to trivialize this. What I'm saying is that our healthcare system is expensive in no small part because nobody of good conscience would turn someone away at the emergency room. That is the most expensive form of care. So a proper universal healthcare system gives everybody a base level of care that says you have regular checkups, you have protection, you have all the things that we've come to expect from a proper healthcare system. It then is a separate question of who pays for that. That should be the government. Do we then have options to opt into other programs? Because,
a few more seconds.
Because what's the right way to provide universal health care for everybody else? So people that have the means to pay and may want to opt into other programs, is that best done through a single payer or through a
Thank you.
provider?
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, we're now ready for the next and final question of the first round. And the fifth and final question of the first round, the starting candidate will be Ms. Cheney. And this is the fifth question of the first round. President Trump has called for adversaries to be jailed, attacked the press, sought to undermine an FBI investigation, failed to clearly condemn those marching with far-right extremists, and in general has shown little understanding of our system of checks and balances. For this reason, concerns have arisen regarding the state of our democracy. Do you agree that our democracy is at risk? And if so, what needs to be done to protect it?
I am concerned about how Donald Trump's actions are impacting our democracy. As an attorney myself and as a former journalist, I find it troubling that alleged violations of the Emoluments Clause, which is that the president shouldn't profit from being the president, are kind of low on the totem pole of the purported violations that are appearing right now. And what's particularly troubling is with what's currently going on with the justice investigation, and then when you look at the release of the Republican memo, calling the DOJ into question in what could be construed as a political attempt to call into question the DOJ's investigation, I find extremely troubling. And then when Donald Trump is also continually calling out the media as fake news. The media has been called the fourth estate. It's always been looked at as the outsider looking in and trying to be objective. Donald Trump is trying to discredit anything that goes against what he wants. I find it extremely troubling for our system of government, and I truly hope that Republicans like Peter Roscoe will at some point stand up against Donald Trump and what he is doing.
Ms. Mazeski.
I do think that our democracy is at risk. With this president, we see someone who is reckless and very divisive. And we look to our president for inspiration and for bringing citizens together. And instead, he's driving us apart and fueling a climate of alienation and hatred. So what do we do about this? We need to absolutely support the Mueller investigation so this can play out. So if we know our democracy was undermined by Trump and Russia together. I also want to note that I don't think we have a strong enough response to what Russia did according to our intelligence agencies in our country. We have been told that they undermine our democracy, that many people saw those Facebook ads as voted in our election. This has got to stop. So Congress voted to have sanctions put in place to put sanctions on countries that are buying military weapons from Russia. And guess what? President Trump did not support that. So again, we need to have a strong response in the future when we feel our democracy is at stake. We have to respond quickly and promptly and strongly, and with our allies, put sanctions on countries that have attacked our democracy. It's the most basic part of being America.
Mr. Casten.
Yes, democracy is a risk, and yes, we can fix it, because our founding documents were written by people who had experience with tyrants and put a good system of checks and balances in place. The problem is real easy. The congressional leadership in the GOP has completely lost their backbone and been completely unwilling to fulfill their obligation to act as a check and balance. Trump is crazy, Trump is terrible, Trump has proved that whatever exceptional thing we thought we had, we're just like everybody else in the world. We are capable at some level of being manipulated by a demagogue. And that's a human nature problem, that's not unique to us. But if we have people in Congress who will hold Trump accountable, who will stand up and truly put country over party, not just say it when they're on their way out the door retiring, we will fix this problem. He will be held accountable and we will get beyond it. But Trump is an agent of chaos. Russia as a government has a vested interest in a chaotic world. You don't have to presume collusion to know that he is doing exactly what Russia's bidding is. And the fact that the Republican Party of all parties, who used to be the people accusing people of being communist and being the pro-national security party, is not standing up and saying, you know what, I actually love America. Put us first, stand up to chaos, use the founding documents, and we will fix this.
Ms. Zordani.
And we saw it in the run-up to the election. We saw Trump trying to undermine the press, and then we saw it when he chose his cabinet. And putting government up for sale, putting Betsy DeVos in as the head of education, the lack of respect for the separation of church and state. Our institutions are at risk, but I do believe they are strong enough to withstand the threat from this administration. I agree that the GOP leadership is not being strong, but I also think it demands more from us as Democrats. And as Congressperson, I would be speaking out more immediately and more vocally about some of the actions that are being taken by this administration. I agree we should have implemented the sanctions that Congress voted for and the president would not implement. But we're also now expanding our war in Syria, and we're not talking about it very much in Congress. That's on Democrats as well. We cannot control the actions of another person. We are responsible for our own actions, and Democrats have to take the lead on this.
Mr. Huffman.
Of decency and competency that you must reach in order to be entrusted with the power that comes with the presidency of the United States, and he has failed to meet those bars, therefore he cannot be president. And this is about holding people accountable so that the next time somebody like this wants to be president and wants to run again, that we'll be able to say, this is not acceptable. It's the same thing with the Mueller investigation. If Trump is able to get away with the obstruction of justice and the clear collusion and everything that's going on, then what's to stop the next guy from doing the exact same thing? These people have to be held accountable, and Donald Trump in particular has to be held accountable. And for all the ways that Peter Roskam has failed this district, his cowardice on this issue, his enabling of Donald Trump is the most egregious. This is why we need people with political courage, with just courage in general, in Congress.
Thank you, candidates. We are now ready for the second, I have some feedback here. We'll see if that resolves this feedback. We are now ready for the second round of questions. In this round, there will also be 5 questions, but each question will be addressed to only three of you. To each question will be asked to only 3 candidates. The groups of 3 were selected in advance randomly. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer. By the end of this round, each candidate will have had a chance to speak first, second, and third on at least one question. The first question will be addressed to Sean Casten, Carol Cheney, and Ryan Huffman, in that order. And here is the first question. And it's a little bit of a long administration's attack on the EPA and the rollback of long-standing environmental protections that have improved the quality of our air and water. What would you do to protect the environment, including the recent deregulatory efforts? And then there's a second part to this, but the first part is essentially with everything that the president has been doing to effectively roll back environmental laws, what would you do about that? Now, the second part to this question is, do you believe that business interests should play a role in forming environmental regulations? And if so, what should that role be? So first question, there's been a recent deregulatory effort, and how would you address that deregulatory effort on environmental issues? And secondly, do you believe business interests should have a role? Again, this question is addressed to Mr. Casten, Mr. Cheney, and Mr. Huffman, beginning with Mr. Casten, please.
Okay, so on the first point, we actually have an example of doing this. Most of you know the name Gorsuch. Some of you may have forgotten that Gorsuch's mother was the EPA director under Reagan, who followed a very Pruitt-ish example. And Congress held her accountable, threw her out. Many good people in the EPA hid their files, brought them back when she was gone, and restored regular order. That will be done when Congress grows a backbone. That's about the most that you can do from the legislative branch. And my goodness, does it need to be done? With respect to the second question, one of the things, and I've spent a ton of time in the business context as a clean energy advocate, we have demonized the environmental movement from the business community at our peril, and the environmental movement has demonized the business community at our peril. There are a ton of policy fixes that are good for the economy and good for the environment. I spent my whole professional career proving that. For the most part, those are done in spite of environmental and economic rules, not because of them. And when you get smart people at the table who will be held accountable, to be clear, you must clean up the air. But when you sit there and say, if you can make money and clean the air, do that before you do a mandate. That structure is generally not in the rules. It's been done in countries like the Netherlands fairly effectively. There are a number of things that could be done with an existing environmental regulation, and I'm going to be cut off, so I would say go to my website. There's a whole environmental section with about far too many pages of how to do that. But there's a lot of fixes that could be done with business at the table, as long as you recognize that we're going to do for the win-win first, and then we'll deal with the trade-offs.
Well, if I could, the first thing I would do is fire Scott Pruitt. I was just reading today about the number of unfilled positions there are at the EPA, and that is purposeful. The staff has declined by the hundreds. And in working with Congressman Foster, who was the only PhD scientist in Congress, we would regularly track what was going on with the EPA, and it literally is deconstruction of that agency. They are trying to get rid of scientists by failing to give them fulsome opportunities to do what they are supposed to do, and they are kind of denigrated to lesser positions. We need to stand up for our environment because we are stewards of this country. We are stewards for our children, and climate change is real, and it is now, and we need to address it. And what's fascinating is it is not mutually inconsistent to have a business community that also is environmentally sound. In fact, that is the business of the future. And as the government, we can do more to create incentives for green technologies. That's exactly what an infrastructure plan can do. That's exactly what a tax plan can do, is foster sustainable infrastructure and green technology.
Mr. Huffman.
Well, I think those two questions are very closely related because the reason the EPA is deregulating is because the business interests have far too much say in setting environmental policy. They have, ExxonMobil and Chevron, all these huge oil and gas companies that have such a powerful role in who gets elected, and then they get their way once Republican administrations get in there. And so that's why you see someone like Scott Pruitt rolling way back on the EPA's role in regulating the environment. And the problem is that the environment doesn't have a really wealthy advocate. If the government isn't going to advocate for the environment, there's no one else with the authority or the power to be able to actually protect it. And so it's not enough to say, well, we're going to incentivize clean energy. We're going to give, we're going to have a business-centered solution to solving the climate crisis. That's not going to be enough. You need to put a price on carbon. You either have to have a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system, both of which say we are going to reduce the carbon emissions in our atmosphere. We're going to do that over time, and that's the only way that you're ever going to keep carbon emissions low enough to a level that it's actually going to put off or stop altogether the worst effects of climate change. We're already starting to see some of the worst effects of climate change. So I would not cater to the business community at all. We are skewed 80-20 already in favor of business, so let's go back the other way and actually protect this planet.
Thank you, candidates. The second question of this round will be addressed to Kelly Mazeski, Jennifer Zordani, and Sean Casten, in that order. And here is the second question. From scaling back the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, delaying implementation of the Department of Labor's fiduciary rule, and repealing net neutrality, the Trump administration has scaled back existing consumer protections and threatens others. What should the government's role in consumer protection be? Beginning.
Well, I think that the government should have a strong role in consumer protection. And when you talk about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I am really infuriated at what's been happening with that one in particular. This bureau was founded after 2008, after the meltdown, because of bad mortgages and consumers being taken advantage of by loans in the mortgage industry. This has been a very, very effective part of our government where people can file complaints and it can be a watchguard for banks and mortgage companies that are using discriminatory lending and charging higher interest rates for minorities than other people. And now Trump wants to take the power to enforce this away from this agency and make it weak. And this really upsets me. So I, in general believe that it is our duty to protect our consumers and make sure that they are protected against fraud and things along this line. And what was the rest of the question? It was the 3-point.
Well, it was the CFPB,
Right.
Protection Bureau, the Department of Labor, the fiduciary rule for investments, which had required investment advisors.
I absolutely do think that they should have fiduciary responsibility. I'm a former financial consultant for a major investment firm. I was a product development chemist, and then eventually I switched careers and went into the finance field because I was interested and intrigued by it. And it is absolutely imperative that people have fiduciary responsibility when people come in and they're asking you to invest their life savings that they're going to depend on. They need to know that they can trust that person and they're not looking just to make a quick buck on a trade.
And as a reminder, the three issues were the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the fiduciary rule for investments, and net neutrality. The next candidate is Ms. Zordani, please.
So my 24 years as an attorney, I've practiced in a lot of areas of law, but my primary focus has been financial services regulation. So when I was younger, I worked on the floor of the Board of Trade, and the Chicago Board of Trade, and I lived through the 1987 crash. And I had a firsthand view of risk management. I was very fortunate to work for a woman who was an accountant and an auditor, and we had good risk management. 2008, I watched and was concerned about Bear Stearns and whether it had enough assets to custody clients' money. So when Dodd-Frank was passed, I understood the complexity of that huge bill, and I understood that it was going to need Republican cooperation to start tailoring the bill. But instead, the Republicans sat on their hands. And now they attack the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is doing very good work. The fiduciary rule is a whole separate ball of wax, because what really goes on is investment advisors are fiduciaries. The issue is your brokers. So when brokers manage retirement funds, they're held to a different standard, and the fiduciary rule is intended to protect retirement accounts. There's a lot of fees that go into retirement accounts, and that costs consumers billions of dollars that they're unaware of. Fiduciary rule is incredibly complex, and it affects a lot of industries. And net neutrality, I am for restoring the protection for net neutrality. This question was too long for 90 seconds.
Fair enough. All right. Mr. Casten.
Let me make an overarching observation on the role of governments and markets. First of all, the business community is neither moral nor immoral. It is amoral. It is a thing. It seeks to accomplish things. You cannot expect business to do the public good. That is the role of the government. But it doesn't mean that it's bad. Markets, when you have a market solution, are a fantastic way to achieve efficiency, but what everybody seems to have forgotten, who took macroeconomics and then fell in love with Ayn Rand or whatever other crazy theory is out there, is that being in a truly competitive market is a terrible way to live. Your customers have too much information, your competitors have too much information, your margins get squeezed. And we used to say in my various clean energy advocacy on the Hill, there isn't a single person who comes to Capitol Hill and advocates for competitive markets. And so we desperately need people in Washington who understand that. I have massive respect and borderline fanboy adoration for Elizabeth Warren as somebody who actually understands markets and advocates for consumers. She is the exception to the rule. So what we need are people who understand markets, have been in those spaces. It's true for investment protections, it's true for net neutrality, it's true for a whole host of other issues. You have to have somebody who sits there and says, yes, I get that there are business interests here, and their interests are valid and should be considered. But the one person who is not here advocating are consumers who want to see an efficient marketplace. That has to be the role of the Congress.
Thank you, candidates. The third question of this round will be addressed Kelly Mazeski and Carol Chain in that order. And here is the third question of this round. American education continues to lag global leaders in providing youth with the tools necessary to flourish in modern society. What can be done to strengthen American education and prepare the next generation to compete in a global economy? Starting with Mr. Huffman.
Well, I wish I had a silver bullet solution to solve all our education woes, but there are many, and almost all of them, though, can be dealt with just a lot more equitable funding. And so much of the problem that we're having, especially in the K through 12 level, is that the funding is largely based, especially around here, on local property taxes. So if you go to school in Wilmette, you'll have a very different education than if you go to school in Bronzeville. That's something that we need to work on, just the way that we fund our system. Beyond that, I think that we have to, there are some very proven methods to help educational outcomes. Early childhood education is critical. It's a great investment for our government to make, because the education outcomes, the health outcomes that you have later in life if you have early childhood education are much better if you have that early childhood experience. Free lunches at school is a big part of it. After school programs is a big part of it. But in general, we just need to be focusing on our public education system and not trying to pivot away to private schools and charter schools. That's not where the funding should be allocated. And then, to really supercharge our educational system, we have to focus on post-secondary school. We've got to make free public college tuition for all students. It should not depend on how much money your parents had, how good of an education you can get. That is where we need to get to as a country.
Ms. Mazeski.
Well, education is a strong personal issue for me, because I'm the first in my family to graduate from college. And it was because my parents worked really hard to provide my sister and me with opportunities for that, and for that I'm very grateful. In terms of education, we need to invest in universal pre-K, because children who graduate from pre-K earn higher incomes as adults. We need to make sure that we have necessary funding at the primary and secondary school level. So if a state can't provide the necessary funding for people, areas that don't have as much money, the federal government should step in to help out with that. And then we absolutely have to help when it comes to higher education. And I just want to say that I think it's really critical that every child born in this country has the opportunity to live up to their full potential. And that we do this by providing a good education. We want to have students educated for 21st century job skills. So we need to make sure there are apprenticeships available for them, that they can go to community colleges or go to a 4-year university and not be saddled with a tremendous amount of debt. It's cheaper to get a house than it is to get a student loan, and that needs to change. And then again, we need to be partnering with high schools and community colleges and local businesses to make sure that our students are getting the skills they need to get jobs as soon as they graduate.
Ms. Chain.
Well, I think the most two significant factors in the educational system that is facing us today is the issue of income inequality, and it's the issue of what our jobs will be in the economy of tomorrow. So first, let's talk about income inequality. Under Betsy DeVos, we're diverting resources from our public schools, and we're taking away the resources that those who most need them can have. An education should not be something that only the wealthy can achieve. And when you look at our higher education system right now, the cost of tuition, I have 2 sons in college, and they both are going to have astronomical student loans. But when we look also at the jobs of tomorrow, we need to be preparing our students, because we don't even know what the technology is going to be. There are going to be the self-driving trucks. There is going to be technology that we are not even aware of today, and we need to be preparing our students now for those critical thinking skills and how to train, because they are going to have different jobs every 5 years in the future, and we need to be thinking now how to prepare our students for the jobs of the future.
Thank you, candidates. The fourth question of this round were Donnie, Ryan Huffman, and Kelly Mazeski, in that order. And here's the fourth question. Some economists believe that increasing the federal minimum wage from its current $7.25 an hour could limit entry-level jobs. Do you agree, and do you support a minimum wage increase, and if so, to what level? And there's just one other part to this. In particular, what level do you consider to be a living wage?
I am an advocate for raising the federal minimum wage to $15. And I think it has to be staged in, and I think there has to be some regional adjustments. And I can appreciate that for certain businesses that may be problematic. I'm not even sure, though, that $15 an hour is a livable wage. But that's a good starting point. I have to thank the really progressive people who have been pushing for a higher minimum wage for a few years now, more than a few. Because when we first started talking about it, there were concerns that it would be a shock to the economy, and we've seen it implemented in places with success. It has to be staged in, and I think it's fair and reasonable. Our wage growth, our wages certainly have not kept pace with the other costs in the economy. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
It's just, do you consider, what level do you consider a living wage? And what would you like to raise it to, which I believe you answered, and what do you consider to be a living wage?
I did. We have to recognize that people are working harder and getting less for their day's labor. And I appreciate that some jobs may be considered more entry level, but those jobs, when people say, oh, we shouldn't raise the wage because McDonald's will automate, McDonald's is gonna automate anyway. We need to focus on lifting up people's wages.
Mr. Huffman.
Yeah, $15 is a great number to start with. I would absolutely support a $15 minimum wage. And it's very critical, though, that we index it to inflation so that as the cost of living continues to go up, so does that wage. I understand the economic argument that it could cause hardship in a business community. My solution to that issue is to take a page again from FDR's book. There was a program in the 30s where they were trying to bridge that gap between the scarcity of food and resources and the amount that people, especially unemployed folks at the Great Depression, had to pay. The government filled that gap. So they said, all right, if you can't sell this product for any less than this and stay viable as a business, and if you can't pay any more than this, then we're going to fill the gap. You can do the same thing with minimum wage. And so that way small businesses are still able to compete, and they say, well, I can't pay more than $9 an hour for labor. But we have to make sure that our people are getting $15 an hour in order to have a living wage. The government can fill in that gap. I think that's the right way to approach this issue. And then I would say the other really key piece of that is getting to universal health care, because that's one of the other issues that's really, that small businesses really struggle with to pay for. So then the cost, if you're not required as a business to cover the employee's health care service, then that's a much lower cost to have that employee anyway. You can have your hourly rate go up without a lot of hardship.
Ms. Mazeski.
I do support a living wage of $15 an hour. I think that anybody who is working a 40-hour work week and working hard deserves to have a chance to live a decent life. And the majority of people earning the minimum wage are not high schoolers who are working in retail, which sometimes I hear from people. It's actually people over the age of 18, and most of them are women. Some of these people are trying to support a family. We need to help them and give them a chance. It's hard to fathom this, but years ago, people were afraid of letting people off on weekends. Businesses were afraid to let a 40-hour work week transpire. And guess what? It all worked out. So I think we have to do this. We have to support a living wage of $15 an hour.
Thank you, candidates. The fifth and final question of this round. Carol Cheney, Sean Casten, and Jennifer Zordani, in that order. And here is the fifth question. Is it the role of the Congress to strengthen unions? Is there any legislation you would support with respect to the role of unions in our economy? Beginning with Ms. Cheney.
I grew up in a union family. My dad was a union butcher, and I understand the importance of unions to the middle class in this nation. And what's so troubling right now is the attack on unions, the attack in this state and at the federal level. Right to work laws that actually are the right to work for less. We need to protect the workers in this country. That is what provided a living wage to people. And what's particularly troubling right now is the Janus decision that is facing the Supreme Court, which has to do with collective bargaining for state workers and whether or not they can have to pay union dues for those collective bargaining. This is an attempt to eviscerate unions in this country. And if we look at how wages have declined, how income inequality has increased, and if we look at the decline in unions at the same time, there is a correlation. Unions achieved some of the greatest rights for workers in this country, and as a nation, we need to understand the role that unions have played. I think everyone should read The Jungle. It provides an instruction on the role of labor unions in this country.
Mr. Casten?
So Congress absolutely has a role here, and there is always a tension between labor and capital. We live at a point right now where wages are at an all-time low as a percent of GDP, total wage income. Corporate profits are at an all-time high as a percentage of GDP. There is no way you look at this number, these relationships, and say, yeah, labor and capital are pretty much in balance. Somewhat cynically, I don't actually think Republicans have any opposition to unions. Republicans just have opposition to Democrats. Unions have been such strong supporters of Democrats that they're trying to take them down. Yes, we need to defend against the encroachment of right to work. We need to defend against these project labor agreements that are allowing people to use public-private partnerships to get around unions. But I think beyond the broad protections to make sure labor has a seat at the table, this automation thing that a number of people have brought up is a real problem that I don't think we're focused on enough. We had about 6,000 people who depended solely on us for their utilities in the company that I ran, are either unemployed or massively underemployed in jobs that are 1099 incomes, totally lost in the system. And if we don't find a way to protect those people, we're going to get in trouble.
Ms. Zordani?
I agree that that Congress has a role in protecting unions, and one of the key reasons for that is to protect collective bargaining and to strengthen the voice that workers have. This goes to the whole theme of where people have unequal bargaining power and the role that government is supposed to play. And we know that workers have unequal bargaining power with their employers. Here in Illinois, we have this continual assault on unions because we have this continual discussion of our unfunded pension liabilities. That's not working people's fault. They paid in their share that was supposed to go to their pensions, and whatever the leadership and the government negotiated, they had an obligation to make sure that it was funded. So that issue should not take away from the fact that workers need collective strength to maintain their wages. Over the winter, the teachers' assistants up in Palatine went on strike, and the teachers had negotiated their contract the year before. But in Palatine now, when the assistants were up, these are the people who help your kids in their classroom and prevent their, peanut butter from hurting one of the kids who has a peanut allergy. It's the nurses, it's the people who help your kids learn. And they were negotiating, when they typically made $11 to $13, they're negotiating for a quarter and some benefits. People need to recognize how important it is for collective bargaining strength.
Thank you, candidates. We are now ready for the third round of questions. In this round, there will also be 5 questions, which each candidate will be asked to answer by holding up a card marked either yes or no. Candidates already have their cards here. Okay. If, after holding up the cards, if the candidates would like to briefly clarify their answers, each candidate will have 10 seconds after each question is asked to clarify their answers, as well as 1 minute at the end of the entire round. Okay, and here is the first question. Do you support increasing the Social Security cap? All candidates have said yes. Now, if the candidates, I think we'll move the other direction this time. If the candidates would like 10 seconds to clarify your answer, if you like. Starting with,
No clarification needed.
it's okay. If there's no need, then we don't need to. Would anyone like to clarify your answer? For the record, all the candidates said yes, they're all in favor of increasing the cap. Any clarification? Anyone?
I'm in favor of it because we know that if we increase the level of wages on which we're paying Social Security, it is going to help fund the system a little more quickly, and it would bring the, it would stabilize it a little bit more.
Would anyone else like that?
I would just add, it's worth, for those of you who don't understand the issue, Social Security is a fundamental progressive system. It's taxed in a fundamentally regressive fashion because it's only the first $125,000 of your salary that goes in. So let's just be consistent about it.
Okay, next question. Do you support making public colleges and universities tuition-free for all students? And I will say that this is something we're obviously very interested in here, given that we are at a college. We find that to be interesting to discuss. So again, I'll say again, do you support making public colleges and universities tuition-free for all students? We have one person who has said yes, and that's Mr. Huffman, and the other candidates have said no. Would anyone like to clarify? Again, we'll begin with Ms. Cheney.
I think there is an issue with income inequality, but at the same time, I think we have to look at it realistically, and I don't want to pay for Ivanka Trump's public college.
Mr. Huffman, any clarification?
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer to do it, and we could pay for it all on about 1/10 of the cost of the GOP tax bill.
Ms. Zordani?
I also don't want to pay for Ivanka Trump's college, but I think that there are differences in both the effort that's expended when certain students go to college versus others, and we can do that a different way.
Mr. Casten?
Yeah, nobody should have a financial barrier to an education, but that's not to say that we should throw money at people who can afford to pay.
Ms. Mazeski?
I'm for debt-free college versus free college, so that we should provide ways to fund and help low-income students so they can't go to college and not be burdened with debt.
Okay, thank you.
And also programs that you can trade work for tuition like we do with the military.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Third question, do you support federal legislation banning states from enacting so-called right-to-work laws? Yes, do you support federal legislation banning states from enacting right-to-work laws? And just by way of background, I believe Senator Elizabeth Warren, I believe, introduced a bill to ban right-to-work laws in all 50 states, along with some other co-sponsors in the Democratic caucus last fall. So do you support that type of legislation, banning right-to-work laws across the country? We have a unanimous yes. Okay, would anyone like some time to clarify?
Yes, I mean, it's a difficult issue because of issues of federalism and states' rights, and that is something that I really struggle with. So this is one of those, in theory, yes, but, you know, I feel like I'm on Jeopardy.
The goal is laudable, and legal concerns are.
Well, there's some time to clarify at the end. Mr. Huffman.
Yeah, again, I think if you're in favor of strong unions, you've got to be in favor of this. I wouldn't get too complicated with states' rights and that sort of thing. You've got to be in favor of strong unions.
Ms. Zordani?
I spoke already. Thank you for my 10 seconds.
I must say, I think I agree, but it's tricky. I think the larger issue is let's protect against a race to the bottom where states can just cannibalize economic resources from the other. I think this works, but I'd like to read the bill.
I come from a strong union family. 3 of my grandparents worked on factory lines, as well as my cousins and uncles. I absolutely support unions, and I will stand up against any efforts made by the Republicans to shrink them.
Do you support banning arbitration clauses in contracts between corporations and consumers? Banning arbitration clauses, and by way of background, there's been an attempt by many corporations to incorporate arbitration clauses in kind of take it or leave it contracts with consumers.
Versus class action suits.
Well, yeah, that's what one of the things that arbitration clauses prevent from being able to happen is class action suits. But arbitration clauses lock the parties into arbitrating privately rather than a full ability to sue and do class actions and things. Okay, so here's the question again. Do you support banning arbitration clauses in contracts between corporations and consumers? And again, an arbitration clause is a clause which requires private arbitration and prevents a lawsuit on a breach of contract claim if there ends up being a dispute between consumers and corporations.
I do support banning it because right now, we were talking about the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, there is a push to allow to prevent consumers from filing class action lawsuits.
Okay, and for the record, everyone says that we have unanimous yes on this, on banning arbitration clauses in contracts between corporations and consumers. Ms. Mazeski has provided some clarification. Ms. Cheney.
It gets to the issue of unequal bargaining power.
Mr. Huckman.
Yeah, we need a lot more regulations and restrictions on how businesses can screw over consumers, and this is a good place to start.
Ms. Rodani.
When arbitration first took hold, we thought it would be more inexpensive for consumers. It would benefit them. It hasn't proven to be the case, and it's not transparent enough.
Mr. Casten.
I think it's fundamentally an access to the courts issue, and this blocks access to the courts. I do think that if you have two equally sophisticated parties, they should be free to enter into clauses that they both agree with. But
And that's a point well taken, and that's why we are limiting the question to, we're assuming it's between a corporation and the consumer. Okay. And then fifth question in this round is, you have seen the other candidates for the nomination for some time now, including in forums like this. If you do not get the nomination, will you commit to supporting, including appearing in public with, the candidate who does get the nomination? Thank you, candidates. That is again unanimous yes. Does anyone, want to clarify on that? Starting with Ms. Cheney. If you'd like to.
Particular answer or
No, if you'd
the whole
like to-
lightning round?
Just we'll get to the minutes, but for now, do you have any clarification of the question?
No, I think it's very important that we stand up together after the primary, because the most important goal is to defeat Peter Roskam, because he is not listening to the people in this district. He is not representing the voters.
Mr. Huffman.
Yeah, the real battle, the real fight for the soul of the country is in November, so whatever disagreements we have now will be pushed aside very quickly after the primary.
Ms. Rodani.
Yes.
yes, but let's remember we have to expand the pool, because for a Democrat to win in the Illinois 6th, you have to convince typically about 30 to 40,000 Republicans to come over as well.
Ms. Mazeski.
Yes.
Okay, so we have now finished these 5 lightning round questions, but you will each, and we'll start again down with Ms. Cheney, you will each have, if you'd like it, up to 1 minute to clarify your response on any of the lightning round questions. Ms. Cheney.
This isn't about clarifying my response to a particular question, but I think all of these questions demonstrate the intricacies of the many issues that are faced by legislators every day. There are nuances and issues, and quick yes or no answers to many of those really don't get into the fulsome analysis that is needed to make a determination.
Mr. Huffman.
Well, I think some of this stuff is really not that complicated. Like I say, if you're in favor of strong unions, you've got to support a ban on right-to-work laws. If you're in favor of consumer protection, you've got to support a ban on arbitration clauses. And lastly, I would just disagree with Sean on how you need to get 30 to 40,000 Republicans to win this district. I don't think that's how we've seen the progressive victories happening in this country, in Virginia and New Jersey over the last year or so. It happens when you get more progressives to come out than you get Republicans to come out, because we know that even when people are dissatisfied with Donald Trump, they're not likely to vote for a Democrat who's sort of close enough to being a Republican. If there's not much difference, they'll still vote for the Republicans. So we've got to rally the base. We've got a lot of energy and enthusiasm in this district, and we've got to get people fired up to come out and vote and give them something to vote for.
Ms. Zordani.
I think that's true. When Democrats vote, Democrats win. So we need to work with the people we know. I would also suggest that there's many people towards that middle who recognize that this Republican administration and Peter Roskam do not represent their values in any way nowadays. So their party has left them behind, and political divorce is so easy. Come join us.
Mr. Casten.
So I guess we absolutely need to motivate all the base to vote, and I guess this is the topic du jour we're talking about. Let's not lose sight of the fact that in 2016, Hillary won this district by 7 points. She did it because she convinced a lot of people who normally pull a Republican ballot that if we're going to get the country on the right track, they have to go the other way. I think if we are sitting here in this room and saying only Democrats can turn out, shame on us. We're here to represent the entire district, not just the Democrats.
Ms. Mazeski.
I think that we have an excellent opportunity to pick up the independents and Republicans in this race, because the majority of people are concerned about health care. The majority of Americans did not support repealing the Affordable Care Act, which fortunately has not happened. I also think Peter Roskam is very vulnerable because he supported eliminating the state and local tax deduction, was the primary architect of this tax bill, which threw his own district under the bus. $5 billion worth of tax cuts were taken by nearly 50% of the residents in the Illinois 6th district. And also, I would say that he's very vulnerable because he doesn't hold town halls as well.
I think we're ready for the fourth and final round of questions. After this round, every candidate will have an opportunity for a closing statement. But to begin the fourth and final round of questions, there will be 2 questions asked. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. And we will work, beginning with Ms. Cheney and working down one by one to Ms. Mazeski. And this is the first question of the fourth round of questions. Why are you the best qualified candidate to defeat Peter Roskam this November? Beginning with Ms. Cheney.
I've been doing exactly what Peter Roskam hasn't been doing as the Illinois Chief of Staff to Congressman Bill Foster. We held town halls. They're not what Peter Roskam says they are. I've done it. I personally took phone calls from constituents in this district, in the 6th Congressional, who Peter Roskam's office was not taking on the ACA. I took and answered those phone calls. But aside from that, Peter Roskam is a savvy politician. He talks as though he's a rational moderate when he's an extreme conservative, and we need someone who is able to call him out on that. I have experience as an attorney. Peter Roskam's an attorney. I have experience as a journalist. I'm used to speaking in those sound bites that unfortunately we need today. We need someone who can go head to head with him on the issues in a crisp, articulate fashion, and someone who has the on-the-ground congressional experience. I'm that candidate.
Well, this is sort of in line with what we were just talking about, but yes, Hillary did win this district, but Bernie Sanders also won this district in the primary. I think what you're seeing is that the district it's not that the Republicans in the district are moving more moderate, it's that more liberals are moving into the district. And what Republicans don't like about Democrats is not really our policy. I think this was said earlier. What they don't like is Democrats. So I still don't think that's a winning strategy. So my approach to appeal to voters of all stripes, of all political persuasions, is to say, I'm going to be an independent voice. The stuff that you hate about Congress, about government, I'm not going to be a part of that. I'm not going to spend every day in elected office calling people on the phone for 4 hours a day as you're expected to do. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to be fighting for the people of this district. And that's what we need to, that's the argument we need to make to people, and to say, I'm going to actually be fighting for causes that are going to help you and going to help you in your life. That's how we're going to get people to vote for us in this district.
Ms. Zordani?
So I'm a new voice for this district. I think I'm very well qualified because I'm not an establishment politician. I'm stepping up to represent the citizens here. And I do think my 24 years as an attorney has prepared me well to go toe-to-toe with Peter Roskam, to debate him on the issues, to talk substance, and to represent what the people in this district are asking for. I disagree with Ryan. We're going to spend time on the phone raising money. That's the unfortunate, sad reality of the job right now. But part of what I want to do when I get in Congress is start pushing against that reality. And I know that I owe you, if I'm 4 hours on the phone not doing the job for you, I owe you 12 hours. I owe you 14 hours. Whatever it takes to get the job done and start moving us forward again, that's what I want to do.
Mr. Casten?
I want to talk about the job of being a member of Congress as opposed to getting one. If anybody thinks that this job is easy and doesn't require unbelievable competence and discipline, you're doing the wrong job. Somehow the Tea Party has injected this idea that inexperience is what it takes. We need people who have proven that they can get things done outside of their area of expertise. When I started a company, I didn't know how to do it. It was an idea. We eventually got to 150 people. We had a decent-sized group of assets. I had to learn a ton of stuff. I had to learn how to surround myself with people who had experience that I lacked. And we can't afford to put people into this job who are learning those skills on the job. 2019 is going to be a really hard year, and we are not going to have the support of the White House. We may not have the support of the Senate. We better put people in who have a record of accomplishment in their professional career prior to that point.
Ms. Mazeski?
Well, as a candidate, I believe I'm the best candidate to beat Peter Roskam because I have the strongest grassroots support and the strongest institutional support. We turned in, my team, the most petition signatures of any of the candidates, and I also have nearly 3,000 individual donations to my campaign. And 82% of that money is from people in Illinois. And that's what's helped me earn the endorsement of Emily's List, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Sherry Bustos, and other members of Congress and environmental leaders. Also, I'm the only candidate who has walked the healthcare walk, who is a scientist, who has a financial background, who is a longtime advocate for the environment for most of her adult life, and has 18 years of experience in local government. I provide the greatest contrast to Peter Roskam as a candidate. And I also just want to briefly mention that before I even announced my campaign last May, I had the wherewithal to put a strong team together because I knew to beat him would take a very strong, cohesive infrastructure, and we've got that.
Thank you. Second and final question of the fourth round. Why are you the best candidate to represent Illinois' 6th congressional district?
I have been listening to our community as the Illinois Chief of Staff for Congressman Foster. And I not only listened to the community, I got results. And that is something that Peter Roskam has not been doing. I can hit the ground running. I have experience not only in the congressional office, but 20 years experience as an attorney handling complex issues. I focused on appellate law, which is applying law and facts together. Before that, as I mentioned, I was a journalist. I think these are the skill sets that will make an incredible difference in representing this district. But most importantly, I understand the relationship between the district and Washington and the importance of conveying what the community wants to policies in DC. I got policies like that when I was with Congressman Foster's office.
Mr. Huffman?
Well, thanks. everyone in this race, I guess with the exception of me, has a long career in being business owners and lawyers, and that's certainly to their credit. Well, what I'm trained to do is politics. It's trained to analyze policy, to craft policy. That is what my background. That's my master's degree in public policy. I've spent time in DC. I know how to actually get things done. And beyond that, more importantly than that, is that I have the political courage and independence to say, this is what I believe in, this is what's right, and this is what I'm going to fight for. And we had an example of this recently at an editorial board meeting, where we were asked the question, who would have voted to keep the government shut down until there was a deal on DACA? And I was the only one of the 7 of us who raised their hand. This is just a hypothetical situation. It's not asking for a whole lot of courage to be able to say that. And I was the only one of the 7 who said they would. That's the kind of fight that you've got to have for what you believe in.
Is there now?
Talked about healthcare a lot, and I knocked a door and I met a woman who was recovering from a stroke. When she told me her story, she put her head down on the table and I saw her eyeglasses taped together on the table. When she came back up, her eyeglasses she had on were taped together. And I know how much healthcare means to the people in our district. But for me, the kitchen I was in, this woman was surrounded by her daughters. And my sister and I were fortunate enough to take care of our mom when she was suffering. I'm looking to represent the people in this district, not because I've had the same experience, but because I know we all share common experiences and we all share the same values. My career as an attorney prepares me to do the job. I'm determined to do the job for the actual people in our district, which makes me the best representative for you.
Mr. Casten?
I feel like I kind of answered this one on my last question, so let me turn this around and put a question to you all. The nature of this weird job application process is that we all talk to you in sound bites, and you have to make decisions based on those sound bites. Engage with us. Ask us questions, dig in, find out what we really mean, call our offices, bend our ears, because at the end of the day, you're not going to really know us unless you find out, which one of us best represents you. And if democracy works well, we'll find out then which one is the best. But I know I don't want a job where I have to pretend to be anything other than who I am. And I want to be totally honest with you about who I am.
Ms. Mazeski?
Well, I have served 18 years in local government in the Barrington area. I've been a village trustee, a plan commissioner, and a zoning commissioner. And the one thing I have learned is how important it is to listen to the people that I'm representing and that I am making decisions for in my community. I also learned what it means to be a solution-based leader. And these are skills that I will take with me to Washington to make sure that I use that knowledge that I've learned, that I will meet with you, I will listen to you, and I will come up with viable solutions and reach across the aisle. Something we desperately need right now is more bipartisan cooperation. And I also want to say that I will hold town halls. And this is something we really need in this community as well. We've only had one in 11 years of leadership with Peter Roskin. So I will have an open dialogue with all of you if I'm fortunate to be your Congresswoman.
Thank you, candidates. Now it is time for closing statements. Each candidate will have 90 seconds, beginning with Carol Sheehan.
I'd yell, but that would just be rude. So, first of all, thank you again for coming out tonight. I believe that a representative in Congress should look at issues with both their head and their heart. The heart is the district, the head is Washington. I've done both. I'm the only candidate in this race who won't say just, I will do that, but can say, I've done that. I think this experience is extremely important in this race because I've already made the government work for people in our community. And I'll just give you a quick, tangible example. There was a Muslim woman who came up to me after Donald Trump was elected and her daughter was being bullied at school. This had never happened before, and I listened to her story. And we decided, at my suggestion, that we would have a town hall in Congressman Foster's district, and we had an event at the Islamic Center of Naperville. This young girl told her story of bullying, and actually that family, someone wrote the word terrorist in ketchup on the windshield of their car. 250 people attended that town hall. It was fine. We also had that girl attend the president's joint address to make a show that we do not agree with bigotry in this country. The head and the heart, the district and DC, and the interplay between them. I have the experience to bring both to the constituents of the 6th District. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for coming out tonight. I talked a lot about my plans for real progressive reform in this district and having the political courage to fight for those reforms. The truth is, I cannot do it alone, especially given my strategy of fundraising that does not rely on spending every day or every hour of the day on the phone with wealthy donors. I need help from you guys. So if you believe in this cause, go to huffmanforcongress.com, send us $5 or $10, sign up to volunteer, to knock on doors for us, check out our Facebook and Twitter page, and most importantly, tell all your friends and family about this campaign and what we're trying to do here in the 6th District. The old way of politics is simply not working. We don't have to be content with a system that expects us to spend half of our time in Congress raising money for our re-election. That's not the way it should work. We know it's not the way it should work. And we need people who are willing to go to Congress and actually change it. Let's try something different in this district. Let's be bold and let's be courageous, and let's not send the same kinds of candidates who are going to run the same kinds of campaigns. Let's send someone from the middle class, not another millionaire. Let's send somebody who's so stubbornly committed to getting money out of politics that he's already defying party leaders who say the only way to run a successful campaign is to spend all day on the phone raising money. Let's send somebody who's going to give voters something to vote for, who can honestly say, if you don't have health coverage, vote for me, because I'm going to fight every day to make sure that you and every other American has health coverage. If you work 40 hours a week and can't afford to feed your family, vote for me, because I'm going to make sure that we raise your salary. That's what I'm going to fight for on behalf of this district, and I hope you'll give me your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verdani.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you for moderating, to the Elgin Democrats and the Dundee Democrats for putting on this event. If you remember anything about me, it's that I will put you first. We know Peter Roskam doesn't put you first, he puts you absolutely last. We know that he's that sheep who follows Paul Ryan, who follows Mitch McConnell, who follows Donald Trump. I'm no sheep. I will stand up for you in Washington. Whether you get on the train every morning to go to work, or whether you sit on that clogged expressway to get to your job, I know what you're working for. I know that we need tax reform that actually protects working families and our seniors, that doesn't burden our children and our grandchildren. What drives me is hard work and honesty, and I'm determined to get the job done because I know that the people in Illinois 6 want better government. So I want to work to restore the progress we had made in America, to move us forward again, to listen to you, and then be your voice in Washington. I would be honored to have your vote and to serve as your representative in Congress. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Casten.
So I know everybody in this room feels like we're on this crazy carousel since the Trump election. It seems faster and faster every day, and it's going to fly off its hinges in a moment. These daily assaults on women, minorities, the environment, kids, the future, all that is good and wholesome is hard to keep up with. We are where we are right now because of the complete lack of backbone of the Republican Party to stand up for this. Peter Roskam's silence is acquiescence, and he is complicit in every piece of damage that gets done, along with the rest of the GOP. We have got to get to a point where the quality of policies that we make is not a function of the party of the person who wrote the policy, is not a function of the politics, it is a function of the facts. That should not be a high bar, and it has somehow become exceptional. You can tell it's become exceptional because we're making so many gross moral errors. How is Rob Portman, much less Donald Trump, allowed to walk the halls of the White House? It's because we have cowards in Congress who are not holding them up to it. How are we taking health care away from people and killing people? It's because we have cowards. We will fix that with good people, and when we get good people in, we can improve Obamacare, we can expand the coverage, we can bring more people into health insurance. We will clean the air and grow the economy, and I know that because I'm here. And we will once again be a place that the best and brightest around the world want to come and live. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Possessor?
Thank you, Patrick, for hosting, and thank you for everybody else who's put this wonderful forum together. We are at a critical point with American politics. This election is not only about Peter Roskam and Donald Trump, it's about sending a message to Washington that our leaders, our elected officials, need to show leadership and need to represent their own constituents. And when you decide to cast your vote, there's only one question you should be asking yourself. Who is going to stand up and fight for me and all the other people in this district? I have spent most of my adult life fighting against climate change. I have been an advocate for health care. I will absolutely stand up for you. You deserve someone, an elected official, who will listen to all the families in our district, who will listen to all of the people in this room, who will listen to each one of you. And if I'm fortunate to be your elected official, your congresswoman, I will fight for all of you in this room, and I will fight for all the families in this district who are working hard to build better lives every single day. And I'm here tonight asking for your support and for your vote on March 20th, so together we can all take down Peter Roskam. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, you guys kind of beat me to the punch here. We really appreciate what these 5 people on this stage are doing. We know how hard it is to run, and we're so appreciative that you've stepped up. Let's thank the candidates.